Deep under the freezing dark waters of a remote Scottish lake, something massive is hiding. Last week, a diver exploring the murky shallows of Loch Bhorgastail spotted a piece of ancient pottery resting on the bottom. It was perfectly preserved, looking like it had been dropped just yesterday, but when scientists dated the clay, the results shattered a century of accepted British history. This wasn't just a lost pot sitting in the mud. It belonged to a massive, man-made island built more than 5,000 years ago. This type of structure is called a crannog, and it is centuries older than the famous stone circles of Stonehenge. For generations, experts told a very simple story about these artificial islands dotting the Scottish waters. History books confidently claimed they were built in the Iron Age, roughly 2,800 years ago. They were written off as simple, safe farmhouses for nervous local chiefs. That timeline was comfortable, neat, and entirely wrong. The new evidence proves that Stone Age farmers were building massive structures out on the water thousands of years earlier than anyone believed. Building a settlement in the middle of a deep Scottish lake is an absolute nightmare to organize, yet these ancient builders spent staggering amounts of time and effort to do exactly that. They had to chop down entire forests using only stone axes, drag the heavy logs across rough land, and sink them perfectly to create a steady base underwater. For reference, today's engineers need heavy machinery, steel walls, and massive water pumps just to build a stable platform in similar waters. So why would a simple farming society go to such extreme lengths to build an island from scratch? The answer involves a completely new way of looking at the lake bed. For decades, researchers faced a huge problem trying to study these underwater ruins. Shallow lake water is incredibly hard to map. It's full of thick mud, blinding reflections, and dense weeds that mess up traditional sonar. To get around this, a team from the University of Southampton came up with a custom underwater camera system. They strapped two high-resolution cameras to a frame and swam them directly over the site. By stitching together thousands of photos, they built a flawless digital 3D model of the entire island. What they found completely rewrote the history of the region. From above the water, the Loch Bhorgastail crannog just looks like a messy pile of rocks dumped into the lake. But the new digital models peeled back the mud to reveal a highly complex wooden platform underneath. Measuring a massive 75 feet across, this timber foundation was carefully woven together with branches and huge logs. It wasn't just a random pile of stones. It was a carefully planned wooden stage anchored straight to the lake floor. The sheer effort behind this Stone Age project is genuinely mind-blowing. To build a solid platform that wide requires hundreds of massive trees, all chopped and moved without the help of wheels or strong work animals like horses. We are talking about thousands of hours dedicated purely to cutting and weaving wood in the freezing wind. These people were everyday farmers, yet they managed to organize a massive workforce to pull off a highly complex building project. It immediately challenges everything we thought we knew about how they lived and who was in charge. This completely changes how we view early European farmers. Experts have long treated these ancient people as capable, but assumed they stuck to building on dry land, things like standing stones or grave tombs. But creating a massive artificial island requires a totally different understanding of heavy weights, shifting water, and how materials rot. The fact that their wood has survived completely intact for 5,000 years proves they knew exactly how to preserve timber underwater. It forces us to ask what else the experts missed while they were only looking at the dirt. And then there is the strangest detail of all, hiding in the mud around the island's edge. The divers pulled up hundreds of pieces of ancient pottery, including beautifully crafted bowls and jars that still had traces of food inside. These weren't just broken trash thrown away, they were large, nearly whole pots that were deliberately placed into the water. You do not accidentally drop hundreds of perfect jars off the side of your island over the years. This strongly suggests the island was never just a normal house, but a special gathering place for repeated ancient rituals. The discovery of a sunken stone walkway linking the island to the shore adds another bizarre layer to the mystery. This pathway meant access to the island was strictly controlled, forcing anyone visiting to walk a specific narrow line across the dark water. If this was just a safe place to sleep and eat, a basic wooden bridge or a few small canoes would have been a million times easier to make. But this massive stone walkway feels permanent and deliberately theatrical. If they weren't hiding from attackers, who or what were they building this water fortress for? The timeline of Loch Bhorgastail reveals a deeply unsettling human obsession with this specific spot in the water. After the original builders laid the wooden foundation, the site sat completely alone until the Bronze Age, when a totally different society arrived. Around 2,000 years later, these new people dumped huge amounts of stone directly onto the ancient wood to build the island back up. 1,000 years after that, Iron Age dwellers returned again to add even more material to the pile. Why did entirely different civilizations, separated by thousands of years, feel an overwhelming urge to keep building on the exact same underwater stage? To figure this out, we have to look at the leading theories. The first and most obvious guess is defense. It was an impenetrable fortress. Water is the ultimate natural barrier. If rival tribes or wild predators are roaming the dark Scottish woods, an island gives you a perfect 360-degree view and total security. It's the perfect medieval castle, built thousands of years before the medieval period even existed. But if keeping people out was the goal, why build a massive stone road pointing directly to your front door? That stone walkway completely ruins the fortress idea. It acts like a giant neon sign guiding anyone straight from the shore to the platform. This brings us to theory number 2, wealth and power. Forcing a massive group of people to chop down huge trees and drag them across rough land takes serious authority. Maybe a rich, elite family built this floating palace to literally elevate themselves above the common farmers working in the mud. But when experts look for the everyday garbage you would expect from a wealthy household, the theory completely falls apart. People living in a house make a lot of trash over time. You expect to find thick layers of butchered animal bones, broken tools, and cooking fire ash squished into the lake bed. Instead, divers found dozens of massive, perfect clay pots. These were heavy, beautifully decorated vessels showing zero signs of everyday wear and tear. They weren't dropped by accident. They were carefully and deliberately placed into the water. So if this wooden platform wasn't a fortress, and it wasn't a house, what exactly were they doing out there? The sheer nightmare of building it offers a massive clue. To make the base, workers had to stand in deep, freezing water while driving huge wooden logs straight down into the mud. Then they wove tons of branches and heavy rocks between the logs to build a stable floor. For reference, modern engineers use steel walls to push water out of the way before building something like this. These ancient builders got the exact same result, using only stone tools and raw muscle. But why endure the agonizing pain of underwater building just to drop perfect pots into a freezing lake? The overwhelming consensus is now shifting toward rituals. The lake wasn't a problem to solve, it was a sacred boundary. The builders made that stone walkway specifically to force a transition from safe, dry land out into a dark, isolated world of water. When scientists tested the residue left inside those sunken pots, they found traces of wheat, dairy, and meat. They were carrying massive feasts out onto the water and offering them to the lake itself. The physical artifacts left behind are so perfectly preserved that they paint a remarkably vivid picture of exactly how this was done. We don't have to guess what this ritual looked like. The archaeology forces us to picture a very specific solitary moment on the water 5,000 years ago. A lone figure stands at the edge of the shore, holding a clay pot the size of a modern beer keg. The vessel is incredibly heavy, packed tight with roasted grain and animal fat. The freezing Scottish wind cuts right through his woven clothes as he steps onto the rough stones of the walkway. The dark water churns just inches below his feet. He walks the narrow path until he reaches the wooden platform floating near the center of the lake. The timber groans slightly under his weight. He doesn't live here, and neither does anyone else in his community. This platform exists solely for the exact ritual he is about to perform. He kneels at the edge of the wetwood and lowers the heavy pot directly into the freezing water. It sinks fast into the dark depths, disappearing into the mud. It is a single, quiet act, but it is one that his descendants will faithfully repeat for the next 3,000 years. When you pull back from that haunting image and look at the sheer mechanics of the site, you realize this changes the entire timeline of human history in Britain. We are taught to view this era as a time of crude survival where people only built simple things on dry land. Yet these communities deeply understood how submerged wood resists rotting. They planned and built structures that outlasted the Roman Empire by thousands of years. They weren't just barely surviving the harsh landscape, they were actively transforming it to fit their complex belief systems. If they could build artificial islands 5,000 years ago, What else did the experts completely overlook? Science is far from done with these sunken structures. Researchers estimate there are nearly 600 known artificial islands scattered across Scotland and Ireland. For decades, almost all of them were written off as relatively recent Iron Age builds. Now that assumption is completely shattered, and archaeologists essentially have to start over. Be wary of anyone claiming we have the full picture of ancient history. Every dark lake and muddy bog could be hiding a massive Stone Age site, just waiting for the right sonar equipment to find it. The timeline of human ambition is far older and far more complex than we ever gave it credit for. We assumed these people lacked the tools, the math, and the organization to conquer the water. We assumed they stayed firmly on the shore. We were completely wrong. There might be dozens more of these massive floating platforms out there. Other ancient structures are still resting deep in the freezing lakes, waiting to be found and waiting to reveal the next chapter in the story of exactly where we came from.